Groups and teams have become an extremely important part of how organizations are structured and how they function. We're going to not make a big distinction between groups and teams, but it's worth having a definition in general of what they are. Two or more individuals interacting and interdependent, which should give you an idea of when they might be applied in organizations, and they should be working together to accomplish a goal or goals. So the working together component and having a goal are very important. As you can see from the cartoon, we don't know exactly what's going to be accomplished by these particular people in their group. They may either fall off the other side of their stairway to heaven, or they may manage to build one. If we look at how people are considering these structures in organizations, we can see that larger companies with more than 100 employees, use teams quite a bit, 82%. 68% of the Fortune 1000 companies use some kind of self-managed work teams, which are a step up. That is, the teams have much more responsibility for managing their own functions. And 91% use some kind of employee participation groups. As you can see from this set of perceptual experiences from a survey, people in general have positive reactions to them. If you look down the list, probably the lowest are effect on profit, effect on competitiveness, which are the hard organizational measures of performance. You can see that those are a little bit lower. Typically, these are perceived data, and we don't know all of the time whether teams are actually going to have these kinds of impacts, because it's very hard sometimes to make the comparisons between what the structure was and what the structure is, given that many other changes often occur at the same time. That's why we have this perceptual data. So how would we define group effectiveness? Well, we need to reach our goals. That is, the organizationally set standards. We need for members to be somewhat satisfied. Short-term satisfaction, we'd like it to be long-term developmental. That is, the experience would teach somebody so they could be a better teammate, better employee in the future. And lastly, these people have to be able to work together over time. If the experience is so bad, pressured, crisis-ridden, that people reject the team overall, then we're going to have problems, because typically what people do when they want to reconfigure their organization is they're going to be drawing on a pool of employees that are the same, relatively the same over time, and although your team may not look the same and your task may not look the same, some of the same employees are going to be on it. So people need to be able to work together over time. When we put people in a group, we know that people are social creatures. They are like cows. They're gregarious. They like to be with other people. So there are motives that members can satisfy when they're put in a group. Attaining mutual goals is the obvious one. That is, if I put you together and work on an interdependent task, you should be able to achieve that. We also expect people to think that they achieve some degree of security through sharing responsibility. That is, the individual is not going to be entirely to blame if something goes wrong. And through mutual support. So as you go through your program of study, a place for you to get mutual support is from people who know what you're going through and are having the same kinds of difficulties. That's the same thing that a group does in an organization. It provides that mutual support because others in the group understand what's going on. An increase in power, of course, the best example of this continues to be unionization. When people gather together, they are more powerful than when they express their voice as one person. So in the group, if the group says something, it is more influential than if an individual says something. And of course, people can fulfill their social needs, affiliative needs in the group. Also, internal regard, that is, I want to like and respect myself. The group may help me do that because the group can succeed where I might fail individually, or the group can accomplish bigger things than I can accomplish. Same with status. This is our external regard, external liking and respect. And lastly, I can obtain social information in my team or group. It's going to help me learn about myself. That is, legitimate feedback can be had about how I'm growing and developing, how I'm doing in the work. I need that because obviously I need to be able to determine whether I'm doing an okay job or if I'm about to be fired. And secondly, of course, I like information that validates myself, that is, that agrees with who I am, and that I'm doing a great job, and that I'm a great person, and that shares my beliefs and so on. So I look for information that also agrees with what I already think. Those two things are not the same, and can be conflicting. If we look at motivations at the individual level and at the group level, we can see that they're going to overlap some typically, but not, and it may not be very much. I just made up this diagram. So whatever that overlap in the middle, the intersection of the two circles is, that's where people are going to be working toward their own goals and toward group goals at the same time. So we would like to have that overlap as big as possible. So if people cared about their group goals, for example, that would be a way to get a bigger overlap. If people are fundamentally task motivated, that would be a way to get a bigger overlap, and so on. Of course, not everybody really likes moving to groups. This cartoon is just a little bit blurry, but pointy-haired boss is saying, we're changing the salary plan to make a bigger portion depend on the success of the team. We reason that if your pay depends on the success of your coworkers, then your priorities will change. And there, Wally and Dilbert are hogging the printer, right? Now that's a pretty resume. Stop hogging the good printer. So that obviously didn't have the effects that the pointy-haired boss intended. And some of you, of course, may be sitting there thinking, well, I don't particularly love working in teams. This is not uncommon, but unfortunately, it's something to be managed in the workplace, given that most workplaces are going to be using teams for some types of tasks. Okay, so the alignment of individual motives on group goals is not going to be perfect, and it's going to be better, of course, when the culture and structure of the organization is going to support the team structures. That is, you're not really being rewarded for being a great individual performer. Some of you may be thinking about the Alex Sander case in this context. And of course, the broader social context also supports group work, say national culture, for example. All of those things, when they're aligned, are much more powerful influences to get people interested in working toward group goals. We want to think a little bit in this section about how a team becomes an entity, how it develops into something other than just a bunch of people. Here's another cartoon. Okay, we've done the team building, brainstorming, and buy-in. Does anybody remember why? Well, this is a good example of when trying to create a team is not quite working. What we would like is the team to develop into something that we could refer to as we. Do we think of the team as we? And do we behave as a collective? If so, the group has experienced some level of development. And the reason why we care about this, and why people have been writing about development for probably 70 years at least, here are some things that make this important. If my identity is tied up with my group, that is, I think of, if somebody asks me who I am, one of the things I think about is my group. I'm part of X group. We know that if I'm similar to the group, the other people in the group, and the status of the group is high, people are going to be more likely to identify with it. So I'm going to take on those goals more likely. And of course, that's going to support a drive for increasing self-esteem and reduce the uncertainty that I experience. So once I identify with the group, then all of a sudden, a lot of my uncertainty goes away, because any choice I have, I can go to my group members about it. I know what my group members might do, and therefore I know what I should do. Ultimately, the results are that we care more about whatever the team is about. We have stronger norms for behavior. That is, we all pull in the same direction, and we're more cohesive. We like each other better. We care more about those group goals. So just briefly, this model of group development has been around forever. I'm sure people are familiar with it. The team gets together in the forming stage. Everybody is polite. After that stage, people start expressing their opinions because they're feeling a little bit more comfortable, so that there is conflict or storming. After that stage, after the conflicts come out, we focus on coming up with agreed upon behaviors that will frame how the team is supposed to behave. Beyond that, we get to a performing stage where we hope performing is going to be the focus of the team. They don't have to worry about coming up with norms. They don't have to worry about conflict all the time, and so on. And ultimately, of course, the team is over with. Here's a couple thoughts on temporary teams. This is a punctuated equilibrium model of how development might occur in a temporary team, and you may be able to see this in many of your teams at school and some at work too. Now, it might depend on how long they go on, whether you can see it very clearly. Typically, from the first meeting to the end, we see two major phases. Phase one, there's a great deal of discussion about what we are going to do. Everybody's fairly happy. They're putting their ideas on the table. Lots of discussion, not much doing going on. Then somebody essentially looks at the calendar or their watch and says, oh, we're halfway through our time. We need to do something. We haven't actually completed anything. That's where the transition comes in. So there's a transition that has a fair amount of conflict and disagreement, but some decisions come out of that so that during phase two, the team is able to complete the task. They may not be as happy and satisfied and relaxed as they were. It's a much more stressful time, but they complete the task on time. So this is a punctuated equilibrium model of team development, in particular for temporary teams. Here's a couple of guidelines for temporary teams. What would help develop the group? If you have to put together a group in a hurry and it's not going to last forever, you can't sit around and send everybody to ropes courses and rafting down the Colorado River and so on. So what's going to help? Developing a priority ranking. That means that everybody's going to understand which activities are most important and how long they should take. We all know that we can make many of our tasks take as long as we feel like making them take. But if we have a clear ranking and we have time commitments associated with that, and that we agree upon those within the team, we're going to get a lot more done more quickly. We want to share our expectations and concerns for the team and the mission and goals. All of this should start sounding familiar. We need to set some operating guidelines. That is, how is the team going to interact? That's not about how we're going to get the task done exactly. It's more about how are we going to make decisions? How are we going to manage conflict? How are we going to manage change? And how are we going to deal with task completion? So all of that should be reminiscent of a charter approach to understanding how a team can develop quickly, get in gear, know what they're all supposed to do, and perform well.